But I find that the actual root of what the podcast becomes about is really about human nature and what human beings are like. I'll give you both sides of this question. Did you learn anything about people, about human nature there that was surprisingly positive? And before you answer that one, did you learn anything about human nature while you were there that was surprisingly negative?
So I'll give you one thing that I learned that I don't know that I would call positive or negative, but it was an observation that in retrospect seems obvious, but it never would have, I never would have thought of it before, and to this day it still serves me well to understand it. So this is the first observation, is that when you look at a significant illness, like a completely disruptive insult, cancer, you have pancreatic cancer, which means you're going to die, and you're going to die soon. There are two types of families that come into that situation. So families that show up already fractured get blown apart. Families that show up already tight become the tightest of any family. The same would be true when you see, a kid that comes in, a burn victim, right? This kid that gets burned badly on the 4th of July, and this kid's going to spend the next 2 months in the hospital. A couple that comes in with tension already in their marriage, they get splintered wide open. If they came in and everything was fine, they're going to be there for each other. They're going to be tighter. So that was an observation that I just saw over and over and over again. And I saw it in probably even more vivid color when I was at the NIH, because the 2 years I was there, I was mostly doing research, but you still had clinical responsibilities. And so you're basically seeing patients who are coming to receive experimental therapy for cancer. So these are patients who are all, otherwise going to die within 6 months. And most of them will still go on to die. Obviously, though, a subset of them we can help. But you're seeing that over and over again. So that was the first observation. And then the second was that there were just a couple of residents who I couldn't believe how amazing they could be, how they could never sort of do the wrong thing. So there were two residents in particular. One really, his name is Chris Sonnenday. He is now he's a transplant surgeon at the University of Michigan. Amazing guy. And so Chris was 2 years ahead of me. And I mean, he was like that guy that I would have done anything for. And I remember when I was leaving, thinking to myself, I'm really glad I'm leaving, because if I stayed, I'd know I could never be as good as Chris. Like that, like how can someone be this good? And I don't mean like he can sew this good and cut. I don't mean even medically.
Good human being.
Just as a human being, he is on a level I can't get to, and I don't know anybody else who can get there either. But the fact that I can't get there is a little upsetting to me, and I'm glad I don't have to spend the rest of my life chasing him. Which, of course, Chris would never think of it that way, because that's the nature of being that guy. He's just completely humble, modest, unassuming guy who just happens to be a god.
It's going back to the first point that you mentioned, and it's something that I've heard people talk about as well. My buddies talk about is, the whole idea of post-traumatic stress and all that, and what war does to people. And one thing that I happen to agree with is pretty similar to what you're saying, and that is going into the war, right? If the person is got a good, stable mindset and a good attitude and is a positive person, and they're going to come out of it with all those good, positive things amplified. They're going to be more positive. They're going to be stronger. They're going to be mentally tougher. It's the people that go into it that are already somehow fractured. Those fractures are going to get worse through the trauma of combat. Again, this is a broad generalization, and there's definitely great guys that see things or do things that it hurts them, and it takes them a while to get through it. But there's also some guys you go, that guy was messed up when we showed up. and now he's worse, and it's that pressure that opens up those fractures even wider. And it's interesting that you saw that with family structures as well, and I could completely see how that happens. And that happens, right? That happens, and you don't even need trauma to make that happen. I mean, you get the financial trauma on a family. If they're not tight, that'll make them blow up.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're tight, going through some financial problems, they'll get tighter. They'll buckle down. They'll save money together. They'll skip the movies. They'll start, they'll enjoy cooking ramen noodles together. So that trauma can expose those fractures. That's why it's important to try and create the most solid foundation you can with your family and with your own mind, so that when these traumas hit, you don't get fractured.
Do the SEALs screen for that?
They try to, but you'll like this story. So we had to take a psychological screening. This is in the 90s, so it wasn't like we were super advanced on any of this stuff. And when I was going through boot camp, they gave us a psychological screening for our attempt to go to SEAL training. And so they asked a bunch of questions, and it was complete the sentence questions. And so it was really obvious what would flag you. And so I made every answer, because I was in boot camp and the food sucked, and so every answer that I gave was just all about food. So for instance, they'd say, complete this sentence: I hate when my mother. Right, so it's pretty easy to say, I hate when my mother shuns me in front of my sisters and I want to kill her. No. All my answers were like, I hate when my mother overcooks the steak and doesn't put enough pepper on it. Just like every answer I gave was about food. But it was really easy. My point is that it was really obvious. If you were not a complete, even if you were, in fact, if you were a psychopath, you would very easily answer all the questions correctly and get through it. And there's been plenty of guys that made it through SEAL training that, there's some bad criminals. There's been a couple really heinous crimes committed by guys that were SEALs, and just they made it through. They got screened. So yeah, they had a screening, but I wouldn't say it's the most effective. They've gotten better now, and some of those guys that committed horrible crimes, it kind of inspired the SEAL teams to step up that screening process as much as possible to make sure that we're not letting guys through that are deranged some way, that are going to do something horrible like that.